So in this short video, we're going to look a little bit closer at second-degree price discrimination, also known as indirect price discrimination. Unlike the previous two examples where firms explicitly charge a different price to different people, so it might be one price is offered to students, another price to non-students, and non-students just cannot get the price that students are offered. Unlike that case, when we look at second-degree price discrimination, everyone is offered the same menu of prices. Right? There might be one price for the small box of cereal, another price for the big box of cereal, and everyone self-selects the option that they want. Obviously, people who have a higher valuation for a given item are more likely to buy the bigger size. And by self-selecting different options from this menu, they end up paying different prices per unit of quantity or unit of quality. So in effect, they end up paying different prices, even though the firm has no idea which consumers are the ones who have higher valuations and which are the ones have lower valuations. Therefore, second degree or indirect price discrimination is a very convenient and often used form of price discrimination. However, actually implementing second-degree price discrimination is a little bit more complicated than I just suggested. And the reason is because you have to design the menu of options to be incentive compatible. That is, you might intend whoever has highest value to buy the larger box of cereal and whoever has lower value to buy the smaller box of cereal. So that's what you're intending to do. You don't actually know which consumer has a higher valuation or lower valuation for this type of product cereal, but you're trying to design the menu of prices so that consumers select each. And you might think, well, let me just charge the maximum willingness to pay that the low valuation type has for the small box of cereal and set a price of the larger box of cereal equal to the high type's maximum reservation value for the larger box of cereal. And you might think that this would be great. You can use second-degree price discrimination, but that actually wouldn't work. And the reason is that the higher valuation type has a higher value for any given quantity of cereal. So for example, if they were to buy the larger box, as you're trying to get them to do, and pay their maximum willingness to pay for that, they're left with no consumer surplus. But if they were to buy the smaller box of cereal, which is priced at the lower type's maximum willingness to pay for that smaller quantity, because the high type values any given quantity more than the low valuation type person, they would be left with some consumer surplus. So they would instead elect to buy the smaller box of cereal, and so this scheme wouldn't work as intended. So the prices have to be designed in a very careful way so that each option is incentive compatible, so that the item that you're intending to sell a person with a given valuation is the one that they voluntarily select. Let's now consider an example to illustrate this point. Okay, so suppose the valuations for the two different types of consumers, let's just say there's two consumers in this market, are given as follows. There's a low type valuation person who values one unit of the good, say the small box of cereal at $4, and 2 units of the good at $5. Let's say the big box of cereal has twice the quantity of cereal as the small box. Okay, so they'll pay $4 for this small box of cereal or $5 for the large box of cereal. Suppose that person H is a high valuation type who values 1 unit or the small box of cereal at $6 and 2 units or the big box of cereal at $9. Okay, now let's see what would happen if you tried to charge $4 for the small box of cereal and $9 for the big box of cereal. That is, suppose that you're trying to charge the low valuation person their maximum willingness to pay for this smaller quantity, and the higher valuation person their maximum valuation for the larger quantity. Okay, let's see what would happen there. Well, if you did that, they'd both be left with no consumer surplus. Person L doesn't have any better option, so they would still buy the 1 unit. But person H, if they were to buy this smaller box of cereal with 1 unit of cereal in it, they would pay a price of $4. Their valuation for that small box of cereal is $6, so they would get $2 in consumer surplus. If instead they bought the bigger box of cereal, 2 units, paying $9, they're paying their maximum valuation for it, they're left with no consumer surplus. So they wouldn't voluntarily select the bigger box of cereal. So what do you have to do? Well, you have to actually reduce the price of the larger box of cereal to give that higher type valuation person at least as much consumer surplus as they would otherwise get. So let's say the price of 1 unit is equal to $4, and let's price the larger box of cereal, so 2 units, at an amount that would give the high type valuation person at least as much consumer surplus as they would get by buying the smaller box of cereal, 1 unit of cereal. So if we set the price at $7, then this person gets $2 in consumer surplus either way, and we'll just say that they, if they're indifferent, they'll elect for the larger box size. So we're going to charge $7 for the larger box of cereal, and then the low valuation type would be willing to buy the 1 unit of cereal, and the high valuation type would be able to buy the 2 units of cereal for total revenue. And we're going to say revenues are profits. Let's just assume marginal cost is 0. So revenue is profits. Revenue equals profits, in this case, of 11. Now, let's suppose they tried to use some other strategy. They could, charge, if they're selling 2 units, they could charge $5 and both people would buy 2 units. 2 people buying something priced at $5 each yields $10 in profits. That's not as high as they're earning under secondary price discrimination. They could charge $9 for 2 units and only person H would buy. Again, that's yielding lower profits. They could charge $4 for 1 unit and 2 people would buy 1 unit, yielding $8 in profits. Right? There's no other way other than this second degree price discrimination strategy that yields profits as high, okay, as $11. So this does seem to be a profitable strategy, even though the firm does not need to know which is the person with higher or lower valuation. They just need to have an idea of what the distribution of valuations are. Okay. I want now to highlight an interesting and unfortunate consequence of second degree price discrimination. Okay. I have this quote here. It is from Jules Dupuis in 1849, way ahead of his time, noting that it is not because of the few thousand francs, French dollars, which would have to be spent to put a roof over the third-class seats in a horse and carriage, that some company or other has open carriages with wooden benches. What the company is trying to do is to prevent passengers who can pay the second-class fare from traveling third class. It hits the poor not because it wants to hurt them, but to frighten the rich. And it is, again, for the same reason that companies, having proved almost cruel to the third-class passengers and mean to the second-class ones, become lavish when dealing with the first-class passengers. Having refused the poor what is necessary, they give the rich what is superfluous. Okay, so what is the idea here? The idea here is that they want to make the lower quantity or quality options pretty bad, so that someone who has a higher valuation for this type of product won't self-select that option, and they'll select some other option. They can get the people to pay more for those higher quantity or quality options. Okay, so let's illustrate this example using this same setup here. Okay, so in this example, I'm now going to assume that they've reduced the appeal of the lower quantity option by shrinking the size of the box. Now, instead of having 1 unit of cereal, it only has 3/4 of a unit of cereal. Okay, and accordingly, each person has a lower valuation for this smaller box of cereal. As you shrink the size, they're willing to pay a little bit less. We'll say that the low valuation type is only willing to pay $3.50 for this smaller box of cereal, and that person H is only willing to spend $4 when the price when the size of this box of cereal has been shrunk to 3/4 of a unit. Okay, and now let's look at what happens if they try to price discriminate. Okay, so if they try to sell 1 unit for $3.50, person L will buy. So let's write that down. We're going to charge price for 1 unit is $3.50. And then if they're going to sell the larger box, which is still 2 units, to the high type, they have to leave this person with at least as much consumer surplus as that person would get if they're buying this smaller box. So with the smaller box, they're now getting only 50 cents of consumer surplus. So the highest price we could charge person H for the larger box of cereal would be $8.50. So I'll write that down now. Now, if you add these together, you can get that the total profits has risen to $12. So second-degree price discrimination can be more effective if the firm intentionally reduces the quality of the worst options. Okay? Now, this is, I think, an interesting economic point, but it might be something that you're not so happy about next time you're flying. If you get on your flight and you realize you have absolutely no leg room, you might realize that that is not because they wouldn't be willing to provide you more legroom for a slightly higher price if they were only catering to you. The reason they're making you so miserable in coach is because they want to encourage those people who are able to pay for business or even first class fares. They want them to do so. So they make the experience in coach intentionally uncomfortable or miserable. The last example I wanted to talk about was something called damaged goods. This illustrates that oftentimes this lower and higher quality set of options is in fact price discrimination rather than reflecting costs. So the example that this paper gave was printers. They would invest the resources to design the higher quality printer. Then once they've designed the high quality printer, what they do is they add a chip to it. Its only purpose is to reduce the quality of that printer, to limit the number of pages that it will print per minute. If you knew this and opened up the printer and actually removed the chip from this, it would actually suddenly become a high quality printer. So think about it. The low quality printer is the high quality printer plus an additional computer chip which costs something. Therefore, the low quality printer, which presumably they're selling for a lower price, actually costs them more to make than the high quality printer. And so that has to be example of price discrimination. It cannot be example of pricing based on cost, because the one that they're selling for less actually costs more to make.